Hello everyone, my name is Camryn Council. I am a sophomore research fellow through the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College, and today I am here at the George Spangler Farm. Now, this barn and this landscape behind me looks very beautiful and pastoral in its present day. However, during the Civil War, this would have been the site of gruesome scenes of the dying and the dead. During the Battle of Gettysburg, this barn here and this farm was turned into a field hospital to be used by the Union Army of the Potomac. What was once a prosperous farm had been turned into a machine for survival. Before the Civil War, George Spangler lived here with his wife Elizabeth and their 4 children. They had bought the farm in 1848, and according to census records, by 1860 it was valued at over $5,000. This was due to the farm's successful production. They had things such as wheat, corn, potatoes, and oats, and they also raised livestock such as cows, horses, and pigs, and they also had orchards of peaches and apples. However, this would change when medical officers from the 11th Corps of the Union Army of the Potomac would come to the Spangler Farm on July 1st, 1863, and decide to use it as a field hospital. Now, this choice wasn't random. There was some criteria that the chief medical officer for the Union, Jonathan Letterman, had in mind for his officers to implement whenever they were deciding upon a field hospital. Some of those criteria included that the field hospital be away from the main areas of fighting, have sources of water for the patients, have ample space for both the patients and tents, and also have road access so the ambulances could bring the wounded in. As it so happens, the Spangler Farm met all of those requirements. Now, in his book detailing the Spangler Farm, historian Ronald Kirkwood writes, "The medical staff officers announced that they were seizing the house, the buildings, and the land for a hospital, and everyone needed to leave at once for their safety." But these officers weren't asking for permission, they were demanding. However, George Spangler and his family didn't have this farm for over 15 years just to be pushed out that easily. And so they were allowed to stay in their house. But the thing was, all 6 of them had to stay within a single room of the house. It was from there that they could watch the transformation happen from a farm into a hospital. Now, let's look at some of the specifics of how the Spangler Farm operated as a hospital. Out in these fields here, officers decided how to best set up the tents to house the wounded and also the officers. This driveway where we stand here now was the original path that the ambulances would have used to bring in the wounded soldiers. An ambulance driver, Private Jacob Smith of the 107th Ohio, recalls his experience at the Spangler Farm, stating that, "We hauled them about a mile to the rear of the battle line out of the reach of immediate danger, and after unloading them, started back to the front for another load. We were not long in finding sufficient wounded soldiers to fill our wagons." Once the soldiers were here at the barn, there had to be a decision on what to do with all of them. And so a system of triage was established, and this is what made determinations on where these soldiers should go based off of their wounds and also likely prognosis. This resulted in different holding areas for the men, such as the threshing level, the 2nd floor of the barn there, would be held for men waiting to go into pre-op. However, throughout the rest of the farm, there were other spaces for the men who didn't have favorable outcomes, and even those who would eventually die and be buried in the orchards. The whole scene was very grim, with pools of blood and amputated arms or legs in heaps. Surgeons, called operators, had to work non-stop to treat these soldiers. This occurred in this area behind me called the forebay, where they had rows of operating tables for the surgeons to work at. The Surgeon-in-Chief, Dr. Daniel Brinton, remarked that very hard work it was too, and little sleep fell to our share. 4 operating tables were going night and day. Moving from one patient to another, these doctors didn't even have time to process these men as individual human beings. They simply became a bigger number in all of the different soldiers that they had to treat. It was almost like an assembly line, with men moving from different stations and from different areas around the farm. While emotion could sometimes get in the way, sometimes it was just too much to bear. Major General Carl Schurz, former commander of the 3rd Division of the 11th Corps, observed an exhausted surgeon who put down his knife, exclaiming that this was too much for human endurance, not seldom hysterical tears streaming down his face. It was a horrific environment to endure, not only for the surgeons but also for the soldiers themselves. Some of them clung to religion for consolation. Others appreciated the female volunteer nurses who served as a substitute for mother, wife, and sister, and in their eyes, no stranger but a friend. These men did anything they could to find some comfort throughout their suffering, or even in their final moments. After 5 weeks, the farm was returned to its rightful owners. However, things would be completely changed from that point on. Even though the Spangler Farm was no longer being used as a hospital, George Spangler and his family still felt the repercussions. Their barn had been shattered, their crops trampled upon, and their resources devoured by an army in need. After filing damage claims that totaled up to $5,000, George Spangler only ever received $90. Quartermaster Agent Z.F. Nye, who handled the case, believed that this was a military necessity and that George's situation was his misfortune, and he is not to be relieved therefrom by the United States, as they were not responsible for the circumstances which created it. This shows that these field hospitals were seen as instruments and machines for survival. The officers and surgeons did their best to save the greatest number of men, no matter the cost or emotional toll that went along with it. Although important to the Battle of Gettysburg, George Spangler was not a unique case. Field hospitals were utilized all throughout the war, in public buildings or even in private residences like this farm. Unless you were like the Spanglers and you stayed at the farm, even in uncomfortable conditions, many of these families would have been expelled from their homes for extended periods of time. And even then, many of them didn't receive proper compensation from the government when it was all over. They just had to accept their new circumstances and begin to rebuild their lives. But images of what happened here would not soon be forgotten. Major General Schurz writes, "There are people who speak lightly of war as mere heroic sport. They would hardly find it in their hearts to do so had they ever witnessed scenes like these, and thought of the untold miseries connected with them that were spread all over the world." So even though they were expelled by force, these field hospitals wouldn't be possible without the help and sacrifice of the civilians who were impacted by the spheres of war, just like George Spangler and his family. If you would like to learn more information or learn more about the individual stories here, please consider joining us for the Civil War Institute's 2023 Summer Conference, taking place from June 9th to the 14th. While there will be many presentations and tours around the battlefield, Dr. Carol Reardon will be leading a tour of the George Spangler Farm on the evening of Saturday, June 10th. If you would like to know more information, or if you're even considering registering, the link in the description below will take you to the Civil War Institute's website. We hope you consider joining us for this year's conference so that you too can continue to explore the rich history of the Civil War landscape. Thank you for watching. This has been Camryn Council.